History is filled with great battles that determined the fate of humanity. Moments where empires rose, civilizations fell, and epics were written. These battles were turning points where not only armies but also ideas, technologies, and heroism clashed. Now, we take you on a journey through time, from Salamis, where trireme warships cleaved the steely waves, to the arenas where Roman legions conquered the world with their disciplined stride. From the walls where cannons thundered and empires fell, and to the deadly trenches of the modern age, here are the 10 most impressive battles in history. In 547 BC, one of the wars that would shape world history would take place. In Mesopotamia, one of the few regions that was the cradle of civilization, the Persians would fight the Lydians for dominance of Anatolia. Initially, the two armies met at the Battle of Pteria, but were unable to defeat each other. The Persians emerged victorious in the subsequent Persian-Lydian War. Cyrus deployed his army in a square formation with the flanks to the rear. The flanks were protected by chariots, cavalry, and infantry. Camels were positioned as a barrier around the archers. The scent of the camels frightened the Lydian horses, disrupting the cavalry charge. Persian archers and mobile towers positioned within the square formation fired a powerful volley of arrows against the Lydians. As Cyrus anticipated, the Lydian army's flanks moved inward to envelop the Persian square formation. This maneuver created gaps at the junctions of the flanks. At this point, Cyrus ordered his flanks to attack, completely disrupting the Lydian army's formation. The Lydian cavalry retreated, suffering heavy losses. Most of the infantry surrendered, but Croesus escaped to Sardis with a small group. This tactic resulted in a decisive victory for the Persians. As a result, the Persian victories over the Lydians laid the foundation for a Persian Empire that would leave its mark on the ancient world. After establishing political unity in the Balkans, Alexander the Great marched on the Persian Empire. In 333 BC, he won the Battle of Issus near the Gulf of Iskenderun in modern-day Turkey. In 331 BC, he decisively defeated the Persian Empire at the Battle of Gaugamela, after which he captured Babylon, Susa, and Persepolis, effectively ending the Persian Empire. Alexander spread Hellenistic culture across the conquered lands and achieved remarkable victories at a young age. The Persians and Macedonians take center stage. The Persians are arrayed along the line marked in red. Darius maintains a strong presence in the center. The horse-drawn chariots are prominent in the front line and on the flanks. The Macedonians, in their blue uniforms, are poised in the center with a tight phalanx of spear-wielding infantry. Alexander leads the way with his cavalry on the right flank. The Macedonian wings expand outward to envelop the Persians. In response, the Persians attempt to break the encirclement by folding their flanks inward. And now the critical moment arrives. Alexander swiftly penetrates the large gap in the Persian line from the right flank. This sudden and decisive attack allows the Macedonian wing to exploit the gap and break through the Persian line. Darius and the Persian forces in the center are forced to retreat. As the heart of the Persian army collapses, the Macedonians quickly press in, changing the course of the battle. Thus, Alexander's masterful plan and swift action break the Persian resistance and ensure the victory of the Macedonians. The Second Punic War, 218–201 BC, marked the beginning of Rome's dominance in the Mediterranean. Hannibal's daring crossing of the Alps with war elephants and his brilliant cavalry maneuvers dealt Rome several devastating defeats, including Cannae. However, Roman general Scipio Africanus turned the tide by defeating Carthaginian forces in Iberia and then forcing Hannibal to face him in Africa. At the Battle of Zama, Scipio outmaneuvered Hannibal by neutralizing his elephants with gaps in the Roman lines and defeating his cavalry. This victory ended Carthage's power and paved the way for the rise of the Roman Empire. At Zama, the Roman cavalry advanced, and on Hannibal's orders, the Carthaginian cavalry retreated into the forest. Hannibal's goal was to disrupt the Roman lines with his elephants, hoping his cavalry would win and achieve a decisive victory. However, the elephants passed through the corridors formed by Scipion. Hannibal engaged the Romans, but contrary to his expectations, his cavalry lost. The victorious Roman cavalry joined the battle and defeated Hannibal. In the 370s, the Hunnic advance into Europe forced the Goths to seek refuge within the Roman Empire. In 376 AD, the Goths were allowed to cross the Danube River and settle in Roman territory. However, due to severe Roman mistreatment and corruption among Roman officials, the Goths revolted. This uprising culminated in the Battle of Adrianople in 378 AD, where the Roman army suffered a disastrous defeat and Emperor Valens was killed. While there were other Germanic pressures on Rome during this period, the Gothic revolt was the key event that weakened the Eastern Roman military and exposed the empire's vulnerability. The long-term consequence was a growing pressure from barbarian groups that eventually contributed to the division and later fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476 AD. The Roman Empire fought a major war with the Goths and suffered a particularly heavy defeat at the Battle of Adrianople in 378. This defeat severely weakened Rome's military might. The Goths then sacked Rome in 410. In the following century, Germanic tribes, Vandals, Visigoths, Franks, Saxons, and others, launched raids on Roman territory. These successive invasions and rebellions gradually weakened the Western Roman Empire, already grappling with internal problems. Finally, in 476, the Western Roman Empire's collapse became inevitable. Following the collapse of the Umayyads, the Abbasids became the increasingly powerful new dominant power in Central Asia. The Turkic tribes in the region were not yet united under a single political unity. Tribes such as the Oghuz and Karluks lived as separate communities. During the same period, the Tibetan Empire was quite powerful in Central Asia. China's Tang dynasty launched campaigns against Tibet, advancing westward and eventually reaching the Talas River. In 751, these two major powers, the Abbasids and Tang China, faced at Talas. This battle would radically alter the political and cultural future of Central Asia. In the mid-8th century, a common soldier in the Abbasid armies, clad in a black tunic and chainmail armor, carrying a round shield and spear, represented the caliphate's power on the battlefield. On the Central Asian steppes, the Karluk Turks, mounted on swift and agile horses, continued their nomadic existence as master warriors with their fur-trimmed headdresses and light lamellar armor. Tang soldiers arriving from the east, with their lamellar armor adorned with colorful silks, long spears, and disciplined ranks, reflected the majesty of the imperial order. In 751, warriors from these three different worlds would meet on the banks of the Talas River in a great conflict that would change the course of history. On the first day, the Karluks clashed with the Chinese army in the center and engaged Tang troops on the flanks. The fighting raged fiercely throughout the day. The fighting continued with equal fervor the following day. However, by the evening of the second day, the Karluk Turks, their anger at the Chinese overpowering them, switched sides. They made a deal with the Abbasids and rode their horses to the Chinese lines. This move disrupted the Tang army's balance, and the Chinese suffered a crushing defeat. Talas marked the Abbasid victory and the end of China's dominance in Central Asia. The Battle of Ain Jalut, September 3, 1260, is a turning point in Middle Eastern history. By the mid-13th century, the Mongols had established one of the world's largest empires and advanced from Asia to Europe. In 1258, they captured Baghdad, ending the Abbasid Caliphate. They then advanced into Syria and Palestine, threatening all powers in the region. In 1259, the Mongol commander Kitbuga launched an attack on Syria and Palestine. The Mamluk Sultanate became the sole major force resisting the Mongol advance. Sultan Qutuz and his commander Baybars concentrated their armies at Ain Jalut, Spring of Jalut, in Palestine to stop the Mongols. In the 13th century, a Mongol soldier would wear fur and lamellar armor, appropriate to steppe life, and take to the battlefield with a composite bow on his back and a curved sword at his waist. His sturdy, compact Mongol horse was his primary weapon. Mamluk soldiers, on the other hand, wore a combination of chainmail and lamellar armor, wore simple steel helmets, and often adorned themselves with turbans. Known for their masterful cavalry tactics, they were a formidable force on the battlefield with their resilient Arabian horses. On the morning of September 3, 1260, in accordance with Baybar's plan, the Mamluk army employed a feigned retreat to lure the Mongols into an ambush. The Mongol commander, Kitbuga, mistook this move for a real one and led his army forward. When the Mongol forces entered the open area of the Ain Jalut Valley, the Mamluks deployed their previously prepared flanks and attacked from two sides. The fighting intensified, and the Mamluk cavalry began to break through the Mongol ranks in close combat. The Mongol army lost its formation under this tactic. At the most critical moment, Commander Kitbuga was killed. Left without a commander, the Mongol army panicked and retreated, suffering heavy losses. This victory marked the first time the Mongols were defeated in an open battle. The Battle of Ain Jalut went down in history as the first major conflict that halted Mongol expansion and established the Mamluk Sultanate as the new ruler of the Middle East. The conquest of Constantinople in 1453 was a major turning point in both Ottoman and world history. The siege, which began on April 6, 1453, lasted 53 days. Mehmed II, also known as the Conqueror, succeeded in breaching the Byzantine walls with massive cannons and advanced siege techniques. On the morning of May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army entered the city, ending the Byzantine Empire. The conquest of Constantinople was not only a city's conquest but also a historical epoch-making event. This event is considered the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern age. The Ottomans seized the most strategic location between East and West, securing control of trade routes, making the city their capital, and transforming Istanbul into a major cultural and commercial center. With this victory, the Ottoman Empire rose to the status of a global superpower and indirectly influenced the acceleration of new discoveries and the Renaissance movements in Europe. In 1453, the Ottoman army prepared for a major siege of Constantinople, the Byzantine capital. Massive bronze cannons were placed in front of the walls to destroy them. While Ottoman engineers were setting up these bombs, the Janissaries and other troops were positioned in an orderly fashion. One of the Ottomans' greatest maneuvers was the launching of ships into the Golden Horn by land. During the night, the ships were silently navigated over greased logs, guided by torchlights. This maneuver surprised the Byzantine defenses and allowed the Ottoman navy to control the Golden Horn. The Janissaries lined up in disciplined ranks before the final assault. Dressed in long, flowing robes, white berets, and armed with spears, these soldiers represented the elite force of the Ottoman army. Ottoman banners waved behind them, and cannons were poised to fire. In the city itself, Genoese mercenaries were preparing for the defense alongside the Byzantines. Clad in Italian-style armor, they took their positions on the city walls, flanked by Byzantine citizens who watched the proceedings with anxious eyes. Finally, on the morning of May 29, 1453, the Ottoman army entered the city. Mehmed the Conqueror rode through a ruined city gate, flanked by Janissaries and Ottoman banners. This victory marked the end of the Byzantine Empire and transformed the Ottoman Empire into a global power, marking the end of the Middle Ages and the beginning of the modern age. The Second Battle of Panipat took place on November 5, 1556, in northern India, between the Mughal Empire and the army of the Hindu commander Hemu. The Mughal Empire was led by Akbar Shah, who was only 13 years old at the time. While the Mughals were trying to strengthen the empire founded by his grandfather, Hemu, in India, the Hindu commander Hemu had risen rapidly and captured Delhi. This posed a significant threat to the Mughals. A fierce battle ensued between the two armies on the Panipat plain. Hemu's army had a large number of war elephants, which initially gave him an advantage. However, during the battle, an arrow struck Hemu's eye, and upon losing command, his army panicked and dispersed. This victory paved the way for the Mughal Empire to establish lasting dominance in India and paved the way for Akbar to become one of India's most powerful rulers in the years to come. The Second Battle of Panipat took place on November 5, 1556, on the Panipat plain in northern India, between the Mughal Empire and the army of the Hindu commander Hemu. At that time, the Mughal Empire was ruled by Akbar Shah, who was only 13 years old. Having captured Delhi and rapidly gaining strength, Hemu posed a significant threat to Mughal rule. On the day of the battle, Hemu's army consisted of numerous war elephants, armored cavalry, and infantry. The Mughal army, however, possessed a more modern structure, including artillery and riflemen. In the initial clashes, the Mughal army struggled under the influence of Hemu's elephants. However, the Mughal troops, supported by riflemen and artillery, created panic among the elephants. At the most critical moment of the battle, an arrow struck Hemu in the eye. With the commander's wound, the Hindu army was left without command, demoralized, and began to disintegrate. The Mughal army seized this opportunity to counterattack and won a decisive victory. As a result of this war, the Mughal Empire established its undisputed dominance in India. Akbar Shah greatly expanded the empire in the following years and became one of India's most powerful rulers. The 7 Years' War, which began in 1756, witnessed a major power struggle both in Europe and in colonies around the world. In Europe, Britain and France were making strategic decisions as they prepared their armies, while in the Atlantic, the British Navy was navigating the seas to dominate the seas. One of the most critical fronts of the war was North America. Although Quebec's forts and French defenses attempted to halt the British advance in the colonies, the British and their native allies gained the upper hand. In India, the British East India Company was expanding its influence in Mughal territories, advancing against the French alongside the local soldiers, the sepoys. While French commanders were developing tactics in their headquarters, the British were forging new alliances with Indian princes. The war was fought not only on land but also at sea. The British Navy defeated powerful French fleets and established control of the sea lanes. The fall of Quebec symbolized the end of French power in North America. With victories in India and ascendancy in Europe, Britain emerged from the war a resounding victor. By the war's end in 1763, Britain had become the world's first truly global empire. The 7 Years' War sealed Britain's rise to colonial power and its leadership on the world stage. In 1804, Napoleon Bonaparte declared himself emperor at Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, becoming one of Europe's most powerful leaders. His rapid victories made France the ruler of the continent. His great successes at battles like Austerlitz and Wagram established Napoleon as an unstoppable commander. However, the Russian campaign of 1812 proved a major disaster for him. Cold, hunger, and disease decimated the French army. Following this defeat, Napoleon was defeated at Leipzig in 1813 and forced to abdicate in 1814 and exiled to the island of Elba. In 1815, Napoleon fled Elba and returned to France. The people and army revived his support, thus retaking power during the period known as the 100 Days. The major European powers immediately mobilized, and a new coalition army was formed under the leadership of Britain and Prussia. On the morning of June 18, 1815, near the village of Waterloo in Belgium, the French army and Wellington's British forces met. The muddy terrain diminished the effectiveness of artillery, and the battle raged for hours. By afternoon, the Prussian army under Marshal Blücher reached the front. This combined attack led to the collapse of the French army. The defeat at Waterloo marked the end of Napoleon's empire. Napoleon surrendered shortly thereafter and was exiled to the Atlantic island of St. Helena, where he spent the rest of his life. This battle paved the way for the establishment of a new European order under British leadership and the beginning of a long period of peace.